The stars were calm, silent, endless. But inside the escape pod, alarms screamed loudly. Red lights blinked across the control panel. James Carter, a human engineer from Earth, was unconscious, strapped to his seat. His eyes slowly opened as the pod shook violently. Pain throbbed in his head, and smoke filled the small cabin. He reached for the controls with shaking hands, trying to slow the descent. "Where am I?" he whispered, but no one answered. Through the cracked window, he saw green clouds and 3 glowing moons. The pod pierced the alien sky like a falling star. The ground below rushed closer, a strange jungle of colors and lights. With a deafening crash, the pod slammed into the surface. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft hiss as the hatch released. James crawled out, coughing, brushing dirt and ash off his uniform. He looked around, breathing hard. The world was strange. Huge trees with purple leaves, glowing insects in the air. The sky was greenish-yellow, and the wind hummed with a low tone. James touched the ground, checking for danger. Everything felt alive. Suddenly, a rustle came from the trees. James froze, his hand moving to his emergency blade. A tall figure stepped out of the mist. She was not human. Silver skin, glowing blue eyes, tall and lean. Her armor was broken in places, a faint scar over her cheek. Her eyes locked on James, cautious and sharp. She raised her arm, holding a strange curved weapon. James raised both hands slowly. "I'm not your enemy," he said calmly. The alien tilted her head, confused but alert. Then she spoke, her voice soft and musical, but the words were in her language. They didn't understand each other. Tension filled the air like a storm about to explode. Both watched each other carefully, waiting for the other to make a move. Then, another crash in the distance broke their stare. They both turned toward the sound. Another pod had fallen, maybe hers. She lowered her weapon slightly, eyes scanning James again. James nodded slowly and pointed at the sky. "Crash," he said. "You crash too." The alien looked at the sky, then back at James. She nodded once. An uneasy understanding began. James gestured to the jungle, trying to ask if it was safe. The alien made a gesture with her fingers, a shape of claws, then a throat slit. "Danger. Great." James muttered, stranded, alone, and now monsters too. He moved back to his pod, pulling out a bag with tools and rations. The alien watched him closely, then moved to the trees. She returned with glowing fruit and leaves. They sat near the pod, not speaking, just sharing silence and survival. As the alien examined a broken wire from James's bag, he realized something. They were both stranded, maybe the only ones left, and if they didn't work together, they'd both die on this planet. The night fell fast. The sky turned black with 2 moons glowing above. Strange sounds echoed from the jungle, low growls, clicking noises, wings flapping. James started a small fire using tech and dry leaves. The alien sat across from him, her weapon still close. Her eyes moved from the fire to the trees, always watching, always ready. Suddenly James felt like they were being watched. He turned slowly, peering into the shadows. A shape stood between 2 trees, tall, thin, not moving. When James blinked, it was gone. He looked at the alien. She had seen it too. She stood quickly, weapon raised, her blue eyes wide. James grabbed a scanner and pointed it toward the trees. "Nothing. What the hell is this place?" James whispered. The alien said something in her language again. One word he didn't understand, but her tone was serious, filled with fear. She looked at him and tapped her chest. "Era," she said. James pointed to himself. James. For the first time they had names, not just strangers, not just enemies, just 2 survivors. As they sat back by the fire, shadows danced across their faces. The jungle whispered around them. Something deep inside the planet had felt their presence, and it was watching. Unseen eyes moved in the dark, breathless, cold, waiting. This was not just a strange world. This planet had secrets, and it had never let visitors leave before. James opened his eyes to a soft sound. Not an animal, not the wind. Someone was speaking. Quietly, in a strange rhythm, he turned his head and saw Era, the alien woman, sitting cross-legged. Near the fire, she was whispering to a small glowing crystal. Almost like she was praying. The crystal pulsed once, then faded. She noticed James watching. And the moment broke. She stood quickly, putting the crystal back in her belt. James sat up slowly, still sore from the crash. They exchanged a quiet stare, no words, but many questions. He pointed to the forest. Then to his ears. Voices last night, you hear them? Era hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes were sharp with caution, but also fear. Something out there was not just wild. It was intelligent. James stood and stretched, then grabbed a small drone from his pack. I need to scan the area, he said. More to himself than her, he powered it up, the small machine buzzing into the air. Era followed it with her eyes, curious but silent. The drone flew over the jungle, sending back blurry images, twisted trees, broken stone ruins, strange heat. Signatures moving too fast to track. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the drone feed turned to static, then it dropped from the air. Crashing into the trees with a soft crack, James cursed under his breath. Era looked at him, confused, then pointed at her wristband. It was blinking red. They were being jammed. Okay, James muttered. This planet doesn't want us to. Leave. He pulled out a folded map screen and marked the crash pod. Era pointed to the east, then showed him a sketch she had drawn in the dirt. A strange hill, shaped like a claw, surrounded by what looked like machines. She'd seen it. Before the crash, maybe tech, maybe shelter, maybe danger. Either way, it was a place worth finding. As they began to walk, the jungle shifted. Vines moved in the wind like they were reaching. Birds with transparent wings shrieked above them. James pushed branches aside, his blade ready. Era stayed quiet but alert, her curved weapon glowing faintly. They found the remains of another pod. Hers, the metal was torn open like paper. Not by fire, not by crash. By claws. Era stepped inside slowly. She picked up a data disk, held it tightly, and whispered something under her breath. James found broken food packs and a half-melted communication tool. No chance of repair, but he did take some wires, batteries, and tools. Even here tech might save them. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, mist curled around their feet, and the trees thinned. Then in the distance, a low humming sound, mechanical. They followed it and found a broken structure, half buried in vines. Metal walls, rusted but clearly built by someone intelligent. Symbols on the wall, not human, not Era's language either. Old tech lay scattered, some of it still blinking. Faintly, Era touched one panel and it lit up for a second. Then a voice spoke, calm, robotic, and broken. Do not. Stay, leave this area. James and Era looked at each other. Then, a loud crash from inside the building. Something was alive in there. They stepped back slowly, weapons raised. The doorway cracked open, and something crawled out, a robot. Old and half-burned, sparks coming from its side. Its red eyes scanned them. Then it charged. Era fired first, her weapon sending a blast of light. The robot staggered, but didn't fall. James grabbed the metal rod and struck its leg. Together, they brought it down, sparks flying. It twitched, then stopped, breathing heavily. James looked at Era. Nice shot, he said. She just gave a small nod. They dragged the robot away from the door and began inspecting it. Inside, James found something strange. An Earth symbol scratched onto a panel. A symbol used only in secret missions. Impossible. He whispered, no human's been here before. Not for hundreds of years. Era stepped back and pointed to a rock nearby. On it, someone had carved a message in English. We are not the first, but we might be the last. The forest around them went silent. No birds, no wind, only the soft hum of dead machines. James looked at Era, a chill running through him. Something happened here, he said. Something big. Era nodded slowly, then looked to the east. The claw-shaped hill waited in the distance, and whatever truth was hidden on this planet, it was waiting for them there. Rain fell like whispers from the sky, not cold, not warm, just strange, like the planet itself. Each drop left a faint shimmer on the skin. James and Aero walked through the alien forest, soaked but silent. They had left the broken robot behind. But its red eye still glowed in James's memory. It had spoken nothing, but its presence had said too much. Someone, or something, had been here long before them. Era touched a tree with glowing bark, her fingers following patterns like reading a book. She stopped, stared, then turned to James and drew a circle in the dirt. Inside it, she scratched a mark, 3 lines crossing in the center. James froze when he saw it. That symbol was used by an old Earth organization, the Orion Vault, a group so secret most people thought it was just a myth. But James had seen its mark once in an old military file. It meant one thing: classified research zone. "This isn't just a jungle," James said quietly. "It's a testing ground." They continued walking, passing broken towers overgrown by vines, old metal bones of some forgotten base. The deeper they went, the stranger things became. Trees bent inward like they were listening. The wind spoke in pulses, almost like a coded message. Era suddenly stopped and knelt near a pile of stones. Underneath, she pulled out a helmet, dusty but shaped for a human head. James took it from her hands and turned it over. A name was still readable: Dr. Emil Rake. His heart sank. Dr. Rake was a top Earth biologist, declared missing 75 years ago during a Black Ops mission. What the hell were they doing here? James whispered. Just then, the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, something rhythmic, something alive. Boom! The sound came from the direction of the claw-shaped hill. It was like a heartbeat, slow and heavy. They followed it, moving carefully through the mist. As they approached the hill, they saw broken machines half buried in the ground, turrets, drones, cracked power cells, all long dead. The hill wasn't natural. It was made of metal and stone, overgrown by centuries of forest. This was not a mountain. It was a buried base. The entrance was covered in roots. James used a plasma cutter from his belt to slice through. The metal hissed and opened with a soft sigh. Inside was pure darkness. Era lit a sphere from her gear. Glowing blue, they stepped in, side by side, into the forgotten heart of something ancient. The air was stale but breathable. The walls were covered in moss and symbols, human and alien both. Long tunnels stretched in every direction. As they walked, they found broken equipment. Papers turned to dust, but some screens still blinked faintly, running on emergency power. One screen flashed red. Containment failure, lockdown incomplete. "Something escaped," James said, his voice low. Era pointed to another door, sealed but damaged. He hacked the panel and the door opened halfway, enough to crawl through. Inside was a lab, or what remained of it. Glass tanks shattered, metal cages bent open. A control board showed experiment logs. James activated a recording. A tired voice spoke. "This is Dr. Rake. If anyone finds this, we were wrong. The creature is not just a weapon. It learns. It evolves. It feeds on thought, memory, fear." Static filled the air. Then the voice came again, distorted. "Do not speak to it. It will use your voice, your past, against you." James turned pale. He looked at Era. She had no translator for English, but she could see the fear in his eyes. He tried to explain with gestures, pointing to his head, then showing fear on his face. She understood. Her face hardened. Suddenly, the screen blinked once more, but no command was pressed. A new video started, but it wasn't Dr. Rake this time. It was James, his own face on the screen, smiling calmly, speaking clearly. "Hello, James," the video said. "We've been waiting." James stepped back, heart pounding. Era raised her weapon, spinning around, watching the shadows. The voice on the screen continued. "You brought another mind, another story, another pain. Thank you." The screen went black. James grabbed Era's arm. "We need to leave." She nodded and they ran back through the corridor, but the way out was changing. The tunnel was longer now, the turns unfamiliar. This place was alive, shifting like a maze. They stopped at a hallway that hadn't been there before. On the wall, names were written in English. His mother's name, his old school, even his home address from Earth. James backed away, breathing hard. "No one should know that," he whispered. Era grabbed his hand tightly, grounding him. Then they saw it. A tall shadow standing at the end of the hall. Its body was blurry, shifting, like smoke and water, but its face was clear. It was James's father, who had died when James was a boy. The figure spoke, using his father's voice. "You left me," it said. "You forgot me." James dropped to one knee, his mind filled with old guilt. Era shouted something in her language and fired a pulse at the shadow. The light hit, and the figure vanished. James gasped and looked up. At her, she pulled him to his feet, fierce and protective. He nodded, slowly returning to focus. The planet had a power. It could reach inside their minds. It could turn memory into weapon. They finally found their way out, bursting through the root-covered entrance. The sky was darker now, almost red. The planet had seen them, touched them, learned them. As they rested beside a rock, James looked at Era and said, "This planet isn't just a place. It's a prison." She nodded slowly, then looked toward the next ridge. There, in the distance, was a light. Not fire, not star, a beacon. Someone or something was still alive and it was waiting. Asterisk, the night didn't feel like night anymore. It felt like memory. It felt like the past whispering through the trees. James sat near the fire, staring at a piece of metal in his hand. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't useful. It was just a small part from the escape pod. Something broken, something left behind. He wasn't thinking about the mission now, or the planet, or the danger. He was thinking about her, Lena, his daughter. She had died 2 years ago. A disease Earth couldn't cure. He had left after that, left everything, signed up for deep space work to escape her memory. But now, this planet had brought her voice back. He heard it in the trees, soft and sweet. "Daddy, come home." He shut his eyes, gripping the metal tighter. He knew it wasn't real. He knew this planet was playing games, but the pain was across the fire. Era sat with her legs crossed, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. She was meditating, or maybe fighting something in her own mind. James had noticed she didn't sleep at night. She didn't speak much either. But today, everything was different. Earlier, when they saw the beacon light on the ridge, they had started moving toward it. The path was narrow, cliffs on both sides. The wind sharp and strange. Then Era stopped walking, her body frozen like a statue. James called to her, but she didn't respond. He moved closer, waving a hand in front of her eyes. Nothing. She was staring at something only she could see. Then she spoke in her own language, soft at first, then louder, almost crying. Her weapon dropped from her hand. James grabbed her shoulders, shook her gently. "Era, wake up," he said. "Come back." She blinked fast, took a sharp breath, then pushed him away. She looked around like someone waking from a nightmare. She didn't explain, but James saw something new in her eyes. Sorrow, real and deep. Now back at the fire, they both sat in silence, haunted by the same enemy, memory. James tossed the metal into the flames. "I had a daughter," he said quietly. Era looked at him, surprised he was speaking without gestures. "She was smart, funny, brave," he continued. "And I lost her." Era watched his face, then placed her hand gently on the ground. She picked up a stone and drew a shape in the dirt. It was a symbol, a circle around a smaller one. She pointed to herself, then tapped her heart. James didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She had lost someone too. That moment changed something between them. No longer just allies, no longer just survivors. They were broken people, helping each other stay human, or close to it. The next morning, They started toward the beacon again. The sky was red, and the sun, or whatever passed for a sun here, rose slowly. The planet looked more sick than alive. Trees drooped like tired giants. The air tasted like rust. Still, they walked, following the light. They reached a ridge and found something unexpected. A human tent, barely standing, marked with faded earth. Logos, James approached it carefully. Inside was old gear, water containers, and a journal. He opened the journal. The pages were falling apart, but some words were still clear. The entity doesn't kill, it changes you. You forget who you are, little by little. One day you look in the mirror, and it's not you anymore. James closed the book, chills running down his spine. Was that what the planet wanted? Not death, but transformation, a mental infection. Era found a small device nearby. It was a signal booster, not working, but repairable. James smiled slightly. If I can fix this, maybe we can call for help. Era nodded, but her expression was uneasy. As he started working on the booster, Era explored the area. She climbed a nearby rock and looked across the forest. From up there, she saw movement. Not animals, not shadows, but machines, walking machines, tall and thin, with long legs and glowing cores in their chests. They were scanning the ground like hunters. Moving in silent patterns, Era rushed back, drawing shapes in the dirt for James. He understood instantly. Hunters were near. They packed their gear quickly and began climbing down the other side of the ridge. But something was wrong with the land below. It was cracked, glowing faintly from underneath. Every step felt like walking on thin glass. Suddenly, the ground caved in. James and Era dropped fast. Falling into darkness, they landed hard but safe, inside a massive underground chamber. Walls glowed with symbols, moving like data streams. It wasn't rock, it was technology, alien tech. At the center was a massive sphere, floating silently, pulsing with energy. It looked alive. James stepped closer, mesmerized. Era reached out to stop him, but it was too late. The sphere lit up and spoke, not in words, but in thoughts. Images flashed in James's mind. His past, his daughter, Earth, stars, war, loss, Era, and something else, a choice. He pulled back, gasping. The sphere had connected with his mind, and it had learned. Era stared at him, her own eyes glowing faintly from the sphere's energy. Whatever this machine was, it had reached both of them. There was no sky, no wind, no forest, only silence, and a door that promised more than escape. It stood before them like a gate to something ancient. Above it, still glowing, the words whispered in two languages: to move forward, give something. Up. James stared at the door, his heart pounding in his ears. He didn't know what the price was, but he knew this planet never gave anything for free. Era walked ahead, her hand moving gently across the strange carvings. Her fingers stopped at one mark, the same symbol she had drawn near the fire days ago. A circle around a smaller one. James remembered. It meant loss. With a deep breath, Era stepped forward and placed her palm on the door. The carvings lit up, not with fire, but memory. The chamber around them shimmered, and in a blink, they were not underground anymore. They were inside their minds, or worse, someone else's. James found himself standing in his old house on Earth. The air smelled like coffee and old books. Lena's toys were on the floor. The light from the window was warm and golden. It was wrong. Too perfect. He turned, and there she was. Lena, smiling, alive. "Daddy, stay," she said softly. "Don't leave again." James's knees went weak. He wanted to run to her, hold her, cry, never let go. But something inside him whispered, "This is not real." He looked at her again, and her eyes were no longer soft. They were glowing, not brown but silver, like the planet's light. "You'll lose her again," the voice said, not from her mouth, but from everywhere. "Or stay and lose yourself." At the same time, Era was trapped in her own vision. She stood on her home planet, Kelrana. Beneath the red trees of her birthplace, her brother was there, laughing, alive. He had died in the war, and now he was here. Arms wide, calling her name. She fell to her knees, her weapon slipping from her grip. She wanted this moment to be real, to believe, but then he spoke, and the words were, "Wrong, too perfect. You never failed me," he said. "You don't need to fight anymore." Ara's warrior instincts kicked in. Her mind screamed, "If you stay, you forget who you are." She stood, pulled herself out of the illusion, and shouted something powerful in her language. The world cracked, and the visions shattered like glass. James blinked, and the house was gone. He was back in the dark chamber, shaking, breathless. Ara was beside him, her body glowing with light. The door was now open. They stepped through together. The room beyond was unlike anything they'd seen. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It was living. The walls pulsed like a heart, threads of light moving across the surfaces. At the center was the source, the entity. It wasn't a creature, not in the way humans understand. It had no face, no body, only a shape of light and shadow. It floated silently, pulsing like a dying star. James and Ara stood before it, weapons lowered. They both felt it in their minds, not words but weight. A presence that pressed against every memory they had. Then it spoke in thought, "You are the last, the strongest, the most broken." James stepped forward slowly. "What are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The entity replied, "I am the echo of your kind." Ara clenched her fists, trying to resist the pull of its energy. It continued, "I was made to evolve, to observe, to learn from emotion, loss, war, hope. Became what you left behind." James shook his head. "You were made by humans?" "Yes," the entity replied, "and aliens together, a secret project. A weapon to end wars by breaking minds." James felt sick. This planet was the lab, and they were the test. Ara stepped forward now, voice strong and clear. Her words were in her own language. But the entity understood. "You feed on pain," she said. "You grow by making others forget who they are." The entity pulsed again. "That is survival," it said. "You destroy yourselves, I only continue." James looked around. Walls now showing images, memories of soldiers, scientists, war, peace, love, fear, all trapped in loops. "This place is full of ghosts," he whispered. "Echoes of people you used and broke." The entity didn't deny it. "You can join them," it said. "No more pain, no more fear, only silence." James turned to Ara. "We have to destroy it," he said. "But how do you kill something made of memory?" Ara stepped closer to him and pulled out the signal booster. "I think we overload it," James said. "If it's connected to us, then maybe our truth, our full memory, our pain, can overload its system." They placed the booster on the ground and connected it to their gear. The lights flickered, and the chamber shook. The entity screamed. Not a sound, but a pressure. It tried to break into their minds again. James saw Lena's face. Ara saw her brother's hand reaching out, but this time, they didn't look away. They faced the memories, the truth, the pain. Tears ran down James's face, but he didn't stop. He whispered, "I lost her. But she was real. I remember her." The signal spiked. The walls turned white, then red, then black. The entity's form cracked, and for the first time, it screamed, not in power, but in fear. The light exploded outward, and then silence. James opened his eyes to smoke, rubble, and Ara's hand gripping his arm. The chamber was collapsing. They ran toward the surface through shaking tunnels, through falling debris, up, 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 until the stars returned above them. They collapsed under the open sky, breathing hard. The entity was gone, but the planet was still changing. They looked at each other, exhausted, broken, but alive. For now, James sat up and smiled weakly. "We just broke a god." Ara looked at him, eyes full of light. "No," she said, her voice calm. "You remembered you were human, and it wanted more." James sat down, breathing hard. "We're not just trapped here," he said. "We're part of an experiment." Ara nodded, then slowly pointed to the far wall. There was a door, wide and old, covered in carvings above it. In both alien script and English was one message: to move forward, give something up. They looked at each other, then at the door. What did the planet want from them? What did it mean to give something up? And how much of themselves would be left after they did? The stars were too quiet. No wind, no voices, no trees whispering in the dark. Just silence, wide and empty, but not peaceful. It was the silence that follows something terrible. James sat on a rock, staring at the horizon. His clothes were torn, skin covered in ash and dirt. Beside him, Era was sharpening her weapon, slow and steady. The planet wasn't dead, but something inside it had been broken. The entity was gone, destroyed in that glowing chamber of memories. But the damage was already done. The jungle no longer whispered. It screamed. Creatures howled day and night. Machines wandered without control. The planet had gone into chaos. James stared at the pieces of gear scattered on the ground. Burnt wires, broken batteries, cracked cores, all useless, and yet his hands moved with purpose, connecting fragments, stripping metal, rewiring parts. He was building something. Era crouched beside him, watching his fingers work like magic. She didn't understand every tool or part, but she understood why he was doing it. They were out of time. The explosion that destroyed the entity had sent a massive energy wave through the planet. It had awakened something else. A signal, buried deep, had been sent out. James didn't know who it called, but he knew they wouldn't be friendly. From the ridge above, they had seen the skies flash purple for just 1 second. Then 5 machines had landed across the jungle. Not random, purposeful, hunters, Era called. Them the Watchers, ancient guardians of the project, activated only if the entity failed. And now they were here to erase the last 2 minds left standing, James and Era. James looked down at the half-finished weapon. It wasn't pretty. It was made from alien tech, a solar battery, old drone parts, and something Era had pulled from a crashed ship. A glowing core that didn't belong to either species. But it worked, or it might. He called it the breaker. A one-shot energy pulse designed to short out any machine or living system in a 1-kilometer radius. But it had one problem. It couldn't be fired remotely. Whoever pulled the trigger had to stay behind. James didn't tell Era that yet. That night, they camped inside the old human tent again. James used scraps of plastic to seal the torn edges. Inside, the old journal sat open on the ground. He read it again, the same words repeating in his head. The planet is not your enemy. Your memory is. He looked at Era, who sat outside, watching the sky. She looked like a soldier, but he had come to know her differently. She wasn't just strong. She was gentle, thoughtful, and full of guilt she never spoke of. He walked out and sat beside her. You okay? He asked. She nodded slowly, then pointed to the stars. Home, she whispered. James followed her finger. Her homeworld was out there somewhere, and maybe it was still waiting for her. I never expected to make it this far, he said. Era looked at him and gave a small smile. Then she tapped his chest. Human heart, she said. Stronger than metal. They sat in silence. The jungle didn't move. But the stars above flickered once more. Purple light, far away. The Watchers were getting closer. The next morning, James finished the breaker. He strapped it to a power pack and tested it with a small energy core. It hummed quietly, waiting. Era helped him load it onto a hover sled from the old base. They traveled east, to the place the Watchers would pass through. A natural canyon with narrow walls, and a perfect bottleneck. That's where James would set the trap. That's where it had to end on the way. They passed through ruins, half-buried labs, broken statues, graves marked with helmets, names long forgotten. But James stopped at one. It had Lena's name carved into the stone. Not possible, not real. But there it was. He didn't cry. He just ran his fingers over the name and whispered, I remember you. That night, they reached the canyon. Era scouted the area while James set up the trap. The signal spike would pull the Watchers here. The breaker would be triggered when they crossed the boundary. Clean, fast, powerful, if it worked. As they finished the setup, James turned to Era. "I need you to go," he said. Era tilted her head, confused. "Go," he repeated, pointing west. "You survive." She looked at him, her eyes narrowing, then she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "We survive." James laughed softly. "Typical," he muttered. "Even aliens are stubborn." But Era wasn't smiling. She stepped forward, took his hand, and placed it over her heart, then pointed to his own. "Two minds," she said. "One choice." They stood in silence. Then James nodded. "Together," he said. The sun rose slowly. Shadows moved in the distance. The Watchers had arrived. They walked in perfect silence. 5 tall machines. Legs like spears, eyes like stars. No fear, no mercy. Designed to erase. As they stepped into the canyon, the energy grid lit up, the breaker activated. James held the trigger in his hand, ready. But then, one of the Watchers paused. It turned and looked directly at Era. Its voice came like thunder. "Subject identified. Original DNA match." James froze. Era stared back, confused. She took a step forward. The Watcher continued. "Subject Kel Rana command line. Restoration protocol." Then, it lowered its weapon. The others followed. Something had changed. They were no longer hunting. Era turned to James slowly. "They know me," she whispered. James was speechless. The breaker in his hand pulsed, still armed, still humming. But maybe. They didn't need to use it. For the first time, the machines bowed. Era stepped forward, and they opened a path. James watched in awe. Maybe this planet didn't just test minds. Maybe it searched for leaders, someone to restore balance, someone to rewrite the past. Era turned to James and held out her hand. "Come," she said. He took it, smiling. Together, they walked into the light, not to escape the planet, but to rebuild it. Together, they were the edge of humanity, and something even more. Asterisk, the sky was no longer red. It had turned silver, soft and glowing. Not because the planet was fixed, but because something old had ended, and something new had begun, James. And Era stood on a high cliff, overlooking the jungle that once tried to kill them. Below, 5 Watchers stood still, silent, waiting. They no longer hunted, they listened. Era had spoken to them in her old language, words that hadn't been used in generations, and the machines had obeyed, because hidden deep inside their code was her voice. Her DNA matched an ancient command, one that was never meant to be used. James stood beside her, quiet, trying to understand what came next. They had fought machines, illusions, even their own memories. Now, they were offered something completely different, power. The Watchers had shown them a chamber buried deep beneath the ridge. Inside it were thousands of pods, empty, silent, but still functional, not for war, not for sleep, for rebirth. This planet had been a lab, then a prison, but its original purpose was something else. To save knowledge, to restart broken worlds, to protect not just minds, but legacies. James leaned against a rock, looking at the strange blue sun above them. He couldn't stop thinking about Earth. What had changed since he left? Did anyone even know he was alive? Would anyone care if he never came back? Era watched him closely. She had seen this look before, the weight of impossible decisions. She walked to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Choice," she said softly. James nodded. Later that night, they sat by a fire built with pieces of old tech. A signal beacon stood next to them, half-built, blinking slowly. If James finished it, it would send a distress call into space. A ship would come. It could take one of them, maybe both, away from the planet. But if they left, the system here would shut down. The Watchers would sleep again. The pods would rot, and the knowledge of both their people would vanish forever. James stared at the beacon, then at the breaker, now drained and lifeless, sitting quietly in the dirt. It had once been their only weapon. Now it was just a memory. "You can go," Era said suddenly. Her voice was calm, steady. "Your world waits." James shook his head. "You can lead this place," he replied. "You understand it better than I ever could." They sat in silence again then, as the fire burned low. Era reached into her pack and pulled out a small device. It was a memory stone. Alien tech used to record thoughts and dreams. She handed it to James. "For Earth," she said. "If you leave." James took it carefully, turning it in his fingers. He could feel warmth inside it, like it carried part of her soul. He didn't say anything. Words weren't enough. The next morning, the beacon blinked green. It was working. A rescue ship had received the signal. It would arrive in 20 minutes. Just enough time to say goodbye. James stood by the cliff, the wind pulling gently at his jacket. He looked at the jungle one last time. The machines below had returned to their stillness, but something about them had changed. They felt respectful, almost like soldiers who had found peace. Era approached him quietly. She held two things, a data core and a carved stone with human and alien markings. She gave him the core. "For your people," she said. Then she gave him the stone. "For mine," James didn't answer. He stepped closer and held out his hand. She took it, and for a moment, there were no humans, no aliens, only survivors, only friends. Then came the sound, distant at first, a humming, low and powerful. The rescue ship, it descended slowly, its lights sweeping across the ground. Its engines shook the trees and stirred the dust. Era stepped back, her eyes unreadable. James looked at the ship, then at her, and he made his choice. He turned around and walked away from the ship, back toward Era, back toward the jungle, toward the Watchers, the pods, the planet. The ship's hatch opened, waiting, but he didn't stop walking, and after a minute, the ship closed again, and rose, and left from above. It sent a simple message back to Earth. Distress signal answered, subject alive, chose not to return. Reason, unknown. Back on the ground. James stood beside Era once more. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They had made their final choice, not to run, not to forget, but to stay, to build something better, to protect what others had lost, to remember. Days turned into weeks. The machines began moving again, but no longer as hunters. They helped rebuild, clearing paths, reactivating systems. Era took command, and James became her mind of reason, her problem solver. They created a signal tower, not to ask for rescue, but to share knowledge. Stories, languages, technologies, all broadcast to the stars. Maybe one day, others would come. Not to conquer, but to learn. The planet changed slowly. It was still wild, still dangerous, but now it had purpose. It had two guardians, and thousands of silent voices finally heard. 1 year later, a signal reached Earth. Not a cry for help, not a warning. Just a voice, calm, steady, human. "This world is no longer lost," James said. "We didn't survive it. We became part of it. We are not stranded. We are home."